Evening, everybody. Nice to see you all this evening. Right, so just to start with, then, just a little bit of background as to why we're talking about Oracy at the moment. So, the Oracy Education Commission review was published in October 2024, which made a clear and urgent case for prioritising Oracy in schools. So, it's called for Oracy to be recognised as a fourth R alongside reading, writing, and arithmetic. So, the review argued that Oracy should be a foundation for all subjects and not just an add-on. So there's several reasons why it's really important that Oracy is picked up now. So the first being the achievement gap that's growing, and Oracy plays a key role in levelling the playing field. Strong speaking and listening skills help children access the curriculum and build relationships and succeed in life. We're also seeing the long-term impact of the COVID pandemic. We've got many children who've started school after lockdowns who've missed out on really important early language experiences. So without intervention, these gaps are going to continue to widen. And at the same time, we're also living in a society that feels incredibly divided. I think that's particularly important in this last week. So teaching children how to express ideas and listen to others and sort of disagree respectfully has never been more important. So we're also here to prepare children for the world of work. So in a future that's going to be shaped by artificial intelligence, and communication needs to be one of the most important human skills that they need. There's also political momentum. The Labour Party is pledged to embed Oracy skills and digital skills into the national curriculum, and we expect it to see a big part in the up-and-coming curriculum review document, particularly now that Jeff Barton, who was one of the chairs of the Oracy Commission, has actually been added to the curriculum review party to work on that. And despite all of the Oracy provision in school and a lot of the support that's been available, particularly in the recent time, it's still very inconsistent. So it depends very much on individual teachers and individual schools as to the Oracy provision that their children are able to receive. So the Commission's review has made a case that Oracy should be a core part of education for every child. So the next question is, will it be a focus or won't it be a focus? Because after the release of the main commission review in October, we all imagined that it would play a really big part in the interim curriculum report that was released in March this year. But it was actually omitted completely. We didn't see the term Oracy actually in there at all. So it was supposed to be a key element of the government's educational agenda. So this really sparked some concern from the Oracy Commission and from the key Oracy charities like Voice 21. So while no curriculum can please everyone, a stronger focus on Oracy could really bring joy and pupil agency back into classrooms. So whether the government chooses to include Oracy as a key focus in the new curriculum will become clear when the new curriculum review is updated in autumn this year. So let's hope that they do prioritise Oracy across all subjects, which will make all the things that we're here to talk about today really useful. Right, so this I've just pinched actually from the Oracy Commission review itself. So this just breaks down the areas of Oracy education into 3 overlapping strands. So you've got listening to talk, listen and communicate, which is explicitly teaching children how to express themselves clearly, listen actively and participate respectfully in discussions. So it really is the foundational skills that underpin all their effective communication. Then you've got learning through talk, listening and communication. So this is where talk becomes a tool for learning. So children use dialogue to explore ideas, test understanding and really deepen their thinking across subjects. So it's not about how they talk, but about why they're talking. So it's the reasoning, the reflection and the collaboration. And then learning about talk, listening and communication is a strand that involves developing pupils' metacognition awareness of language. So it's more analytical, looking at how language works, different dialects, and the role of spoken language in society, which we think is going to be included more in secondary education as it used to be in the old GCSE English language. So today we'll be focusing on just the first 2 areas, so the learning to and the learning through talk, as these are the most relevant and actionable when you're teaching English, maths or science in primary. So we're going to explore these strands which might look like in practice, and how we can support pupils to become more confident speakers and listeners in all these areas. So the first one, learning to talk, then, as I said, it's about helping children develop the skills that they need to speak and listen effectively. So this includes important factors such as turn taking, making eye contact, using the appropriate tone when you're speaking to different people, vocabulary, and responding to others and being respectful. But these skills do not need to be taught separately in oracy lessons. They can be developed naturally through subject teaching, just as long as we're intentional about doing it and ensure that children are regularly experiencing the four modes of talk, which are building understanding, debating and persuading, negotiating and making change, and expressing and performing. So these modes give structure and purpose to the way that the children use the spoken language across the curriculum. So, for example, in English, children might summarise a text or explore character motivation through a discussion with the peers. In science, they might present some findings or explain a process. In maths, they could just justify a method or reason through a problem collaboratively as a group. So each of these involves talk that builds understanding and helps pupils communicate with clarity, with a purpose. So the goal is to give children as many regular and meaningful opportunities to practice the speaking and listening in varied contexts as they possibly can, as these build the skills that they become confident and more fluent at. And this forms a foundation for using talk as a tool to access learning across all subjects. The learning through talk then is all about using dialogue as a tool for thinking. So in this approach, we're not just teaching children to speak well, we're using speaking and listening to unlock deeper understanding in certain subject areas. So for example, in English, rather than just answering comprehension questions in writing, pupils might explore a theme like justice or unfairness within a whole class discussion. The teacher can then guide this using open-ended prompts and questions that encourage children to build on other people's ideas, to refer back to the text, and to challenge the views of different people and their peers with respect. So this kind of structured talk is really powerful, as it helps to sort of identify misconceptions, strengthen children's vocabulary skills, and gives quieter pupils a chance to process their thinking out loud. So it's called dialogic teaching in action, and research shows that it improves learning outcomes across all subjects. So then, before we can expect children to talk and listen effectively, we really need to sort of set some clear expectations. So that means establishing a shared understanding of what it likes to be a good talker and what it sounds like in the classroom as well. So one simple way to do this is by creating some discussion guidelines. So at Twinkl, we call this a conversation code. So a short, child-friendly sort of set of ground rules for talk that you co-create within your classroom. So keep it simple, that's really the key. So agree on a small number of really non-negotiable things like turn taking, listening without interrupting, always using kind and respectful words, and always trying to work towards a shared agreed outcome, could be some examples. So by involving pupils in creating the code themselves, it actually gives them ownership and means that they're more likely to follow the rules because they'll have helped to create them in the first place. So the conversation code shouldn't just be a poster that sits on your English display, but it needs to be embedded across all areas of your curriculum. So whether pupils are discussing a text, whether they're reasoning a maths problem, planning a science science investigation, should I say, or just simple things like queuing up to go out into the playground, the same ground rules of talking to and listening to each other should always apply. So whenever everybody understands and agrees on how to speak and listen to each other, you create a safer space for people to be able to talk, which we've found really helps quieter pupils find their voice and gives all children the confidence to participate, knowing that they're all going to be heard and have their views respected. So help you, we have created conversation code packs that are available for Key Stage 1, Lower Key Stage 2 and Upper Key Stage 2 on the Twinkl website. So these just quickly guide you through the process of setting up some discussion guidelines using a quick, engaging, practical activity. And then there's an editable poster in there as well if you want it, so you can actually put your chosen guidelines on there and display it within your classroom. So what does good look like within Oracy? So our Oracy progression steps that we've created for years 1 to 6 give you a clear guide of what Oracy development should look like through the primary years. So they're designed to show you what good looks like at each stage so you can build on these skills progressively over time. So the steps have been organised around something we've called the 5 Cs, which are content, communication, collaboration, confidence and cognition. So the 5 strands help break down what we're actually looking for when we talk about Oracy skills. So for example, a child might be confident in speaking, but needs support when structuring ideas or working effectively in a group. So these progression steps help you to identify that. So progression begins with really simple speaking and listening skills in year 1 and moves to much more complex communication by the time the children reach year 6. So this includes things like reasoning, critical thinking and being able to reflect on what others have already said. So you can use these steps to support your planning, to assess children and to support your curriculum design across different subjects to make sure you're getting tasks where you are actually able to practice these skills. So they're not just there for English lessons, but you can use them across to set consistent expectations for talk in every lesson and really help children find their voice in every subject. So in regards to English then, I'm just going to talk you through a few things that we've added to the Twinkl website recently. So one simple and effective way to embed Oracy into English lessons would be to swap out written comprehension tasks for more structured discussion tasks. So this can really be done with any text you're already using in your reading lessons. So instead of writing answers, pupils could just take part in more meaningful conversations about the text without any written outcomes. So these can happen in small groups as a whole class with the aim of developing understanding through dialogue and giving pupils space to explore and express their ideas. So this approach supports both learning to talk and the learning through talk elements, because pupils are there practicing skills like listening, turn taking and reasoning, while also deepening their comprehension of the text that you're reading. So we've also developed what we call conversation comprehension packs to help with this approach, but the same approach could be modelled with any text, as I've said. So these are available in the Oracy Hub, which we'll give you the link to, across various cross-curricular sort of topics. And then we're also going to be included in the new English scheme units going forward as well for some really well-recognised texts. So to support all the learners when you're doing tasks like this, and not just the comprehensions, but lots of other discussion and debate tasks, we've also got something called talking role sentence stems that give pupils prompts to help them ask questions, build on others' ideas, summarise the thinking. So it makes it easier to sort of scaffold tasks so they're more focused and inclusive for all the children that you've got in your classroom. They're talking about your English scheme, reading and writing lessons as well, and integrating Oracy into your multimodal approaches. So bringing Oracy into reading and writing lessons doesn't have to mean adding in anything extra. It means enriching the activities that you're already, I'm sure, doing in the classroom. So it might be a good idea to start with drama or role play or storytelling, as these give the children a way to explore characters and settings and plots from the inside out, and they allow pupils to experiment with voice and perspective before they actually write. It's also really a good idea to encourage children to articulate their ideas out loud before writing to help them clarify the thinking. So saying a sentence out loud supports structure and the word choices and the fluency, especially for those who find writing sort of a tricky concept. And it's also really good to have oral rehearsal as well to strengthen the grammar and vocabulary skills. So whether you're rehearsing a description, a sentence starter or an explanation, if children can actually speak out loud to each other to build language patterns, then it helps them to transfer that into their writing. You can also integrate really purposeful Oracy tasks as a sort of outcome to your writing. So in having a purpose where you know you're going to end a writing unit with a speech or with an interview or with a presentation, so you're giving a real audience and real reason for children to write and communicate clearly so that they know who they're speaking to and why that the writing can become more meaningful and more focused to give them an end result. Finally, to make all this more accessible for every child, as I said, we obviously need to scaffold talk for some children. So we've got lots of sentence stems, talking roles, substitution tables, word banks on Twinkl that support children to organise their thinking and contribute confidently and build up the language that they need to succeed. So structured talk leads to stronger writing and definitely a more secure understanding of the text that you're covering in your literacy lessons. Right, I think that's me. You're probably sick of listening to my voice, so I will pass you over to Gemma, who's going to talk to you about oracy within science.
So there are many key benefits for developing oracy skills within primary science lessons, and these include developing scientific vocabulary, encouraging deeper thinking and reasoning. It supports children to evaluate and then move on to explain and justify their ideas. And finally, oracy is a good facilitator for encouraging scientific discussions. In the next few slides, myself and Matt, who also works on the science team, is going to take it in turns to go over these key points and give some examples.
Thank you, Gemma. Evening, everybody. Thank you for joining. Yeah, one of the most important aspects of science is asking questions in order to make sense of the world around us. And interestingly, when you start to look in detail, oracy opportunities are an integral thread running through the primary science curriculum, and it's explicitly mentioned in all year groups throughout primary. So it's therefore vital that it must be a prominent feature within the classroom during your science lessons. What I've done over this slide and next slide, I've included some relevant snips from the curriculum relating directly to oracy. There's the one at the bottom there, and then on to the next slide. So yeah, on this slide, I've popped some of the statements in for each sort of key stage broken down a little bit, pulled directly from the national curriculum with the mentions of the need for oracy. And hopefully from this table, you'll also be able to see highlighted how the scientific language use progresses through the pupil's primary journey. So more specifically, I was invited along tonight because I've been responsible for writing the brand new oracy packs for science for Twinkl, which are in line with some of the materials that Becky's previously mentioned. So all of them use the framework of the 5 C's for that progression through each of the year groups. So hopefully over the next couple of slides, I'll be able to outline how they can be best used to support oracy within the classroom. So specifically then, the oracy packs could be used very flexibly as a whole unit or as individual activities in order to be able to tailor it to the needs of the learners within the classroom. Each of the packs includes a detailed teacher guide outlining all of the activities within there, the intended outcomes, teacher support, and also assessment opportunities throughout. And what I've done, I've included a link to the pack on the website, on the Oracy Hub from the slides for everybody. But this flexibility means that the activities can be used as discussion starters linked to a science unit. An oracy-based activity is an alternative within some lessons, within your scheme of learning, as morning work activities, part of continuous provision, group interventions, or like additional scaffolding to reinforce science vocabulary and scientific concepts, or even as an assessment tool. So the list is endless, fully flexible. And I'll hand back over to Gemma.
Thank you, Matt. So one of the points initially mentioned was oracy can be used to build a strong foundation for scientific vocabulary. Children can use oracy skills to help build confidence in understanding and applying scientific vocabulary, but it is key that the development of scientific vocabulary is prioritised in the initial planning stage of any unit or scheme of work that you'll be covering. It's most important to firstly consider what vocabulary to teach, when and how it will be taught. And this just helps ensure that opportunities to learn and develop this vocabulary is integrated into part of the learning sequence, rather than something that is just added in at the end. In terms of collaboration, which we've got further on in the points, across phases, it's often easy to do this between particularly if you're through school, I think from reception to Key Stage 1, and then from Key Stage 1 to Key Stage 2. But the harder bit to do is that transition when you're going from Key Stage 2 to Key Stage 3. I know some primary schools have really good links to secondary schools. For some, it's more difficult. For us, it is slightly easier at Twinkl because we have a Key Stage 3 specialist team. So our vocabulary progression documents, we work closely with our Key Stage 3 specialists to ensure that the key vocabulary introduced at primary school allows us a smooth transition to the vocabulary which then is developed in Key Stage 3. Vocabulary should be easily accessible to all children. In the top right here, you can see an example of a word map that's taken from our new Planet scheme of work. For all of these word maps and for our vocabulary cards, we include dual coded vocabulary content as much as possible. This just helps give children context and a reference point for discussions. An example of this, you can see the word map, vocabulary cards within each lessons are also included. We also try to ensure, just as accessibility, that backgrounds and visuals are kept simple, just to avoid any cognitive overload. Also, the bottom image you can see here, I'm not sure if it's readable, but for each of our PowerPoints that are linked to our scheme of work, they include a tiered vocabulary slide. Tiered vocabulary is supported by the Education Endowment Report, which was released fairly recently, called Improving Primary Science, and it can just be another useful way to break down key vocabulary for children. Key vocabulary in science helps educators effectively teach and scaffold learning by categorising words into levels based on their uses and frequency. So again, we're just continuing using Oracy to introduce scientific vocabulary. So talk through students can listen to and practice using new vocabulary as they move from word introduction to word ownership. So this, I've put a link on the slide there called Voicing Vocabulary. And what it was a 2-year research project, and it was led by Voice 21, which Bex has mentioned earlier on, to help answer the question, how can Oracy education support vocabulary development? And again, I would recommend this for any schools that's got vocabulary as a focus, and it could be specifically developed in scientific vocabulary or vocabulary across the curriculum. The research project takes you through the structure, and then it's followed in the Oracy-centred approach to vocabulary development. So we can use retrieval recap sessions. We call them Remember It's in Planet, but again, there's various terms for this within schools. At the start of the lessons, an opportunity to discuss and revise vocabulary. The top bit here is just an example, but we have lots of these where we use the retrieval sessions, say recap, remember it, whichever you choose to call them, but it's just a perfect opportunity to revisit vocabulary at that point. It's also good to provide child-friendly definitions for any new vocabulary here that's been introduced. And children, again, back to the Oracy side of it, it's really important that when we're introducing this vocabulary, that we encourage children to read, say the word, and then discuss the definitions that are there. And what we also really aim to do, which you can see here, is to provide high quality images that work alongside those as well. So they read the word, they're encouraged to see the word in context in the definition, and then they've got the visual cue that all links together to help embed the understanding of that word. So also we can give opportunities for children to use the word in a sentence. In Planet Science, the Plan vocabulary is incorporated into linked ebooks, which is just the perfect opportunity again for reading across the curriculum, and it just makes it easy to give children related context of the vocabulary. I suppose this example you can see, I'm not sure you can see it clearly, but we've got the STEM on the Remember It, and we've got the definition for STEM here, and then in the ebook we've then got the word STEM and it's highlighted, and then it gives context for that vocabulary as well. As all this ensures that the science vocabulary has been explicitly taught, creating opportunities for repeated engagement in use over time. Over to Matt.
Thank you. So in a similar way, within the specific science Oracy packs, the accurate use of scientific vocabulary is a thread that runs through each and every one of the activities within the pack. Again, similarly to Planet Science, the dual coding aspect of it, as well as the definitions, provides that greater context for the words, and also is a nice sort of prompting reference point when it comes to encountering the word in other parts of the pack and other activities, so that then children can use it with confidence. There's also within the Oracy packs an additional vocabulary resources folder, which can be used as additional add-on activities just to further embed that vocabulary. These are intended to build confidence and automaticity in using the vocabulary within their talk activities. And as well, hopefully you'll see on this slide that I think it's been mentioned before, but accessibility is at the forefront of our minds when we're creating the content, just for different learning needs and also different confidence levels. And it's been considered within the Oracy packs with the use of talk mats. And there's an example of one here on the right-hand side of the slide, which offers some sentence stems and vocabulary to help structure the sentences. Every activity within the Oracy packs contains an accompanying talk mat which scaffolds that learning and that talk. And in addition to this, many of the resources are also available in alternative dyslexic friendly fonts as well, just for that accessibility. As the slide says here, plenty of opportunities for children to hear and use the vocabulary will help them to feel more empowered and confident to use it in context. Further detail about some of the activities can be found in the link to the report that Gemma mentioned, the Voice in Vocabulary report that's found on the slides. These activities can be used as like a reference point or for inspiration for helping children to embed that vocabulary and use it confidently. Back over to Gemma.
So now we're going to just be taking a close look at how Oracy can be used in science to encourage deeper thinking and logical reasoning. We all know how important problem solving and reasoning are to help children fully grasp difficult scientific concepts, which is why we've created opportunities to include these in our Planet curriculum. So you can, the ones on the right are an example of our reasoning cards, and so they specifically link to the Planet scheme. And we have each of these in one of these in each of the lessons. Each of the reasoning cards encourage children to think deeply, applying their knowledge in new contexts and challenging their understanding of the topic. And the ones on the bottom, they're not linked to Planet, but they are available. But these are our discussion starter cards. And again, these aren't new. These have been used for a long time, but they're still really an excellent tool and can be used to help prompt clear and accurate scientific discussions with peers, providing an opportunity to extend learning and develop scientific reasoning and Oracy skills. I think both of these resources, so we've got lots of different examples on site linked to your different topics, but they can also be a great tool for helping with assessment. Again, it's just a different way of assessing children, and then again through them opening up and feeling relaxed and discussing their ideas, it allows you to then see what they already know and help hopefully then address misconceptions.
Okay, so back to the Oracy packs, as well as reasoning opportunities in there. I know that Becky mentioned about the different modes of talk earlier, so hopefully this covers a lot of those different areas. So we have reasoning opportunities, but also opportunities for description, comparison, discussion, and explanation, all of which encourage the use of full sentences in order for children to articulate themselves fully in full sentences. Back over to Gemma.
In the national curriculum, Oracy talk is an important aspect of children sharing and evaluating their findings, and which we're going to look at in the next slide, how it mentions it. We can use visuals, as you can see here, and prompts to help scaffold discussions around their findings as seen in the prompt that's on the screen. These can also be stem sentences, waggles, and many more. These work in two ways to help give the conversations a focus, and they also offer support for children who are less confident to engage in discussions. Giving learners the opportunity to discuss their scientific findings releases them from the constraints of written work and can give the teacher a much better insight to where a child is actually working and what they need to work on next. These can be recorded, these discussions, and referred back to support with evidence, which I know, and there's some quite often that pressure on sort of where's your evidence of what children have been doing. And also they can really help with assessment of working scientifically, which is an area that we often get teachers asking around. Again, this just gives another example of a different approach to assessing working scientifically skills. So here are some further examples of how question prompts and STEM sentences can be used to help children evaluate and share their findings orally, which can help children build conclusions orally as well.
I just wanted to share here as well from the Planet Science packs that there are some examples within upper Key Stage 2 particularly, where there are opportunities for more structured and formal discussion as well in the form of debates. This is clearly outlined within the lesson and scaffolded in a way to allow learners to feel as though they can participate and contribute and feel successful in their talk. I believe that's it from science for us, so I will now hand over to John to discuss oracy and maths.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Gemma. So, yep, I have the job of talking to you about oracy in maths tonight, which is relatively straightforward because I can't really think how you would teach maths these days without involving oracy, really. To me, it is integral to how we teach maths. When I think back to my own lessons at primary school, when I was at primary school, they were fairly quiet lessons, whereas now I think if you go into most maths classrooms, certainly in primary schools, it'd be fairly unusual to hear a very quiet classroom. But if we can get some of that talk to be about the maths, even better. So the National Curriculum 2014, as it is at the moment, does mention that the quality and variety of language that pupils hear and speak are key factors in developing their own mathematical vocabulary, and mentions, of course, their mathematical justification, argument, and proof as well. So talking about maths helps to deepen understanding about maths. It helps to build mathematical habits, and it boosts confidence and equity. So what does it mean to talk mathematically? Well, the NCTM talks about disciplinary oracy, the idea that every subject has its own language and ways of thinking. In maths, that might mean speaking with precision, using vocabulary like commutative, factor, and reasoning clearly. So talking mathematically isn't just about confidence, it's also about developing the language and habits of mathematical thinkers. And children need to be immersed in that language. It needs to be modelled by all the adults in the room and by their peers, and it needs to be used by the children themselves. Conjecturing, generalizing, explaining, justifying, and refining are all ways that we can include oracy in our lessons, and all of those things are also core to mathematical thinking. So when we talk about maths, we are making the intangible tangible, and we can learn a bit more deeply as a result. Becky earlier talked about the two sort of areas of oracy that we were focusing on tonight, which was learning to talk and talking to learn. So you're already familiar with those underpinning principles from earlier, but what do they look like in the context of maths? Well, learning to talk is about helping pupils develop the language they need to express their thinking clearly. That includes using precise mathematical vocabulary like factor, quotient, or perimeter. But it also includes sentence structures and STEM sentences that might help them to explain and reason. That precise mathematical vocabulary is really important, and sometimes teachers might be reticent to introduce some of that vocabulary because it's unfamiliar. Words like addend and subtrahend and things. My argument with that is that if a child can learn what a split digraph is with some confidence in Key Stage 1, then adding in that sort of new vocabulary for mathematics is something that they can grasp as well. Some pupils might say, I times the number, or I guessed and got it right. Others might struggle to begin at all, and oracy can help us to model the correct way of using this language, scaffold and support them to be more confident and accurate in how they talk about their maths and their understanding. Learning through talk, on the other hand, is about using spoken language as a tool for thinking. So it's about how pupils work things out together, how they test out ideas, how they spot mistakes or recognize patterns. It's not just about sharing finished thoughts. In fact, some of the most powerful learning happens when pupils are midway through a task and working together to puzzle something out, and that's where you see those light bulb moments that we're all looking for, when somebody spots something and is able to make a conjecture about what they've seen, or even try out a generalization. I wonder if this always happens. Educational researchers like Neil Mercer and Lynn Dawes have been clear that children need to be explicitly taught how to talk and given opportunities to learn through talk. In maths, that means developing both the communication tools and the reasoning habits that support conceptual understanding. So really understanding the structure of the maths, not just the procedures that they might be using that day. Ideally, we want classrooms where pupils don't just give the right answer, but explain why it works. And that's why I think one of our jobs as educators is to make sure that children answer in full sentences, and that we don't ever just really accept a given answer as the full answer, unless it's justified, unless they can explain how they got there, and whether it would still work in other contexts, for example. So both of these lenses matter, and we need to help children to learn the language of maths and also learn through using it in meaningful, purposeful ways. I included some practical strategies that just to indicate how you might introduce Oracy into maths. I'm sure you're doing lots of these things already. Think, pair, compare. Slight variation on think, pair, share. The thinking time is obviously really important with these things. So not just talk to your partner, but actually have some thinking time first, then talk to your partner, and each of you explain how you've come to the conclusion, to a possible solution, or where you got stuck. And modeling this with the children first, of course, is a great way into this. And then they can compare different strategies before feeding it back. And this can help to increase participation because more pupils are involved in meaningful discussions before they share it with the whole class. Silent strategy swap is another way. This works well where there are multiple ways to solve a problem. Each pupil works out a solution in their own way, then swaps with a partner, and their task then is to explain their partner's method to the group. This encourages careful listening, which is another side of Oracy, mathematical language use, and an appreciation of different approaches as well. The one sentence challenge is trickier than it sounds, but this is a great idea for a plenary or a midpoint check. Encouraging pupils to summarize their method or their understanding in exactly one sentence. And I usually try to limit the number of ands that they can have in that sentence as well, otherwise it just goes on forever. But this forces them to be precise, helps them to helps you to see who really understands the concept. And then the final one is my favorite one, which is just splitting the pairs into partner A, partner B. Partner A has to explain how to do a task to partner B, who then models it. So this can work really well with manipulatives or pictorial representations. It can also work well with written procedures if that's what you're focusing on at the moment. And then, of course, you can swap and get the pairs to do the same thing. Strategies like these align with the kinds of structured interaction promoted by both the NCETM, the National Centre for the Excellence of Teaching in Maths, and the EEF. They support reasoning, they help pupils to make connections, and they can have a particularly strong impact on pupils who may not always get to speak in a lesson. So, sentence stems. You might be using these already in lessons. The idea with these is that we want pupils to be able to start, to structure, and to extend their thinking. So if we want pupils to think and speak mathematically, we need to give them the tools to do that. And that means explicitly teaching the language of reasoning, not just hoping that it gets there through exposure. Sentence stems and talk frames are really useful for this. We've got some examples of them in the resources on the Twinkl website, along with the word mats and things. They produce structure they provide structure and confidence, and they are especially useful for pupils who might struggle to get started or who tend to give one-word answers. What we're looking for is to encourage children to say things like, I know this because, or first I did this, then I did that, or I agree with whoever, and because. These kinds of prompts help pupils organize their thinking and encourage full sentences, encourage using precise vocabulary, and also encourages logical reasoning. The key really is that over time, these structures become internalized, and that's where the STEM sentences are really useful. People start to use them independently, and their explanations become more fluent and detailed. But until we get to that point, we need to model these sentences for them and encourage them to use them with each other as well. You can introduce stems one at a time, or keep them visible on the board or the working wall during problem solving. You can have them on mats on the table. The thing I would probably avoid doing is just having them on a screen at the start of the lesson, because they need to be there when the children need to use them, really. So just going through them at the start of the lesson can be useful sometimes, but really the key is to have them there when the children are going to use them. The other side of this, of course, is using Oracy for assessment, and it's a really valuable tool that we can use for formative assessment particularly. So it gives us an incredibly rich insight into how the children are thinking. When pupils talk, they reveal far more than when they just write answers down. We can hear misconceptions, we can notice when vocabulary is being misused or misunderstood, and we can often spot when a pupil's method might be fragile, even if they've got the right answer. So, for example, as I mentioned earlier, a child might say, I times it. There's an opportunity for us to correct that vocabulary. Or I just knew it. And I know that can be frustrating for some children when they just know it and we're asking them to actually explain how they know it. But again, the purpose for doing that is really to get them to think about their thinking, that metacognition, so that they can recognize the structure in the maths that they're looking at. Listening carefully to their explanations helps us decide where to go next, whether it's reteaching a concept or running an intervention group, maybe for some pupils, or adjusting the challenge level if pupils are grasping something quickly. We can also hear when pupils begin to generalize or reason mathematically. Phrases like, that always happens when, or that only works if, suggest that they're making deeper connections, which is what we're always looking for. So Oracy doesn't just support learning, it also supports teaching. It's one of the most powerful forms of formative assessment we have, especially when we make the time to listen and respond. It's always tricky when lessons are so crammed, but giving children thinking time and then encouraging them to answer in full sentences and explain their thinking, I think is vitally important. Ofsted's reports and their curriculum reviews have pointed out that in many classrooms, questioning is still a weaker area. The best question often in maths is just why. It's a really quick one to ask, but takes a little bit longer to answer. And pupils are then given the opportunity to explain their reasoning. Oracy routines help us move beyond surface level responses and really listen for conceptual understanding. Oracy works best, as the rest of the team have already said, when it's not treated as something extra. It should just be part of your daily teaching. That might mean using talk partners consistently and with a clear purpose, not just talk to your partner, but what do you want them to talk to the partner about? What are you going to ask them to feed back in a moment? Asking open-ended questions that invite discussion rather than just short answers. Not accepting that short answer and asking children to answer in full sentences is really powerful. Building in structured talk during problem solving. For example, pausing to ask, can you explain that method to your partner? Using mini plenaries where pupils compare different strategies. Ending lessons with sentence stem reflections, such as today I learned that, or one thing I'm still working on is. Other things such as always, sometimes, never problems, or what's the same, what's different. Again, one of my favorite key questions is just what do you notice? What do you notice? And ask children to spot what they notice, make comparisons, and talk about what they're seeing and the connections that they're making within the lessons. Quick oral rehearsals as well before recording any written reasoning is especially useful. And one powerful way to embed oracy is by creating what John Mason describes as a conjecturing atmosphere. That means that all ideas and attempts are treated as worth exploring, not immediately judged as right or wrong. I know in maths sometimes it feels like there's always a right or a wrong answer, but actually just digging into those answers a little bit deeper can really lead to some connections being made. Having that atmosphere builds trust, makes people more willing to take risks, which is what we're looking for. The goal isn't to add anything extra really to your practice or your workload. It's just to be deliberate about the talk that's already happening and to create space for the kind of dialogue that helps children think, reflect, and grow. When oracy becomes a normal part of classroom routines, pupils begin to expect to talk about maths, preferably, and to listen and to think together. And that's when you really start to see real gains in reasoning, confidence, and understanding. Research also shows that oracy can help close the gap. Without deliberate structures, confident pupils tend to dominate and others fall further behind. But by providing a way in for all children, we can help to narrow that gap. There are, as I mentioned earlier, lots of resources on the Twinkl website. There's sentence starter lanyards even, and sentence stem lanyards. There's posters that can help with that conjecturing and sentence stems further. And then we've got reasoning problems as well, which can be used with stem sentences alongside them, making sure that that vocabulary is right alongside where the children will need to use it.